From the first moment I saw Silas, I understood why his wife had strayed. He was tall, but his frame was unnervingly thin. He walked with a noticeable stoop, shoulders slumped forward, the cheap, garish blue and purple driver-for-hire jacket hanging loosely on his frail body, swaying with each step. As he drew closer, I could see a worn, off-brand mechanical watch on his wrist. His black athletic shoes were thick with dust, leaving distinct, muddy prints on the otherwise clean, polished marble floor of the building lobby. He embodied poverty, looked utterly unremarkable, and was completely unkempt. He could offer a woman neither a sense of security nor any semblance of vanity fulfillment. It seemed tragically fitting that while he was out braving the biting wind and snow to work, his supposedly sweet and gentle wife was likely wrapped in another man's arms, entangled in a passionate embrace. And that man was my husband, Dominic. The irony was a bitter pill. Silas's wife, Elara, and my husband Dominic were, at that very moment, checked into a 5-star hotel room about 4 kilometers away. I knew the room number. I knew the brand of expensive red wine they'd ordered to enhance the mood. I could even vividly picture Dominic's likely posture as he pinned Elara beneath him, a sordid, primal, sinful image that clung to my mind like a stubborn stain. Perhaps it was the amount of alcohol I'd consumed, but for a bizarre moment, I hallucinated, replacing their coupling faces with mine and this poor man standing before me. The thought was unsettling, utterly out of place. "Miss Serafina? You called for the driver." I snapped my gaze up to him. His eyes, surprisingly intense and hawk-like, locked onto mine, giving me a jolt. They were, despite everything, quite captivating eyes. "The car is in the parking lot across the street," I said, tossing him my car keys. "Would you like me to bring it over to pick you up?" He lowered his head again, breaking the intense stare. "No need. I'll walk over with you." I stood up, pulling my coat tighter around me. My legs felt a little unsteady, my steps light and airy. "It's cold outside," he murmured from behind me. I didn't feel the cold keenly. In fact, the sharp, biting wind seemed to clear my head, allowing me a sliver of rational thought about the impulsive decision I'd made that day. But my foot slipped on a patch of ice near the entrance, twisting my ankle and sending me stumbling. Thankfully, Silas was right behind me and caught me just in time. His arm went around my waist to steady me, a fleeting touch that was withdrawn almost instantly. A faint, clean scent of soap drifted from him. He drove exceptionally well. His handling was steady, unhurried, yet tinged with a nervous awkwardness that mirrored his demeanor. "Miss Serafina, we've arrived." I shifted in my seat, preparing to get out, when a sharp pain shot through my ankle. I let out a small gasp, looking down to see my ankle already starting to swell beneath the thin stocking. "You won't be able to walk like that. If you don't mind, I know a little about massage." Snowflakes were beginning to fall outside the window. I slipped off my high heels and tentatively placed my injured foot on his lap. The vivid splash of crimson nail polish against the pristine white snow outside, coupled with the unfamiliar touch of a stranger's hand on my ankle, seemed to raise the temperature inside the car inexplicably. I studied his hands carefully. They were rough, strong, and warm with long, dark fingers. A simple white gold wedding band rested on his middle finger. A wedding band, a symbol meant to represent protection, loyalty, the sacred bond of marriage. I glanced down at my own ring. A custom-designed Cartier diamond ring. A gift from my husband that had cost him half a year's bonus. Inside, etched into the platinum, were our names and the words, "Till death do us part." Looking at the sparkling diamond, it felt as cheap and meaningless as Silas's humble band. "A little gentler," I requested. "My apologies." I frowned slightly, then pulled my foot back. The throbbing had lessened considerably. I had to admit his technique was surprisingly good. He looked flustered, his head bowed, his posture stiff, nervously turning his wedding band as he waited for my assessment. "How long have you been married?" "Oh, in 10 days it will be exactly 1 year." He stammered out the answer. "Are you happy together?" "Quite happy. She's a certified public accountant, works at a big company. She's much more capable than I am. In our home she's the strong one, I'm the weaker one," he said, a small genuine smile playing on his lips, a fleeting look of happiness crossing his face. How truly pathetic. "Well then, belated happy anniversary to you both." "Thank you, Miss Serafina." I gave him a 5-star rating on the ride-hailing app and paid the fare. But just as he was about to get out, I called out to him, "Leave me your number." I'll contact you directly next time I need a driver. I'll admit my initial interest was purely curiosity. A detached morbid fascination with the woman Dominic was cheating with this time. This wasn't his first infidelity, so I was past the point of acute pain or indignation. Was simply numb. But I was taken aback to learn he'd stooped to targeting someone within his own company, a subordinate in the finance department no less. And the sweet and gentle finance manager, Alara, was a married woman. That sparked a new layer of curiosity. Who was Alara's husband? I was even more surprised to discover that this man, Silas, whose life seemed otherwise unremarkable, held the 6th position on the driver-for-hire company's list of star drivers. Ordinary, humble, living like an ant. Dominic returned late, citing another client dinner excuse. I didn't bother to ask for details. I simply took the crumpled, sweat-stained clothes he tossed at me and handed him fresh loungewear, following our usual silent routine. The clothes reeked of cheap perfume, a sharp, cloying scent that was almost sickening. I suddenly remembered the faint, clean soap scent of Silas and found it impossible to imagine him and Alara sharing a life together. Dominic showered and immediately got into bed. I quietly slipped in beside him and gently nudged him awake. He opened his eyes impatiently. I pointed to the date I'd circled on the calendar. It was my fertile window. We were trying for a child. I'm tired, he mumbled, waving me away as if shooing a fly. I didn't crave his affection, nor did I covet his wealth. All I wanted was a child, something that would truly belong to me, something I could cherish and nurture. Perhaps Dominic didn't know I had passwords to all his electronic devices. After he fell asleep, I opened his phone and found his conversation with Alara. The fool hadn't even bothered to delete the incriminating messages. They were filled with vulgar, nauseating endearments. I scrolled through them quickly, then froze, staring at one particularly vile exchange. Have a child? Why would I ever have a child with her? Her parents are murderers. What if our son inherits their genes? I'll never have a child with her. Not in a million years. So that was it. Why didn't you just say so sooner? I had no desire for my future child to be born into uncertainty or disownment. Dominic, in my eyes, was merely a convenient legal sperm bank. Knowing his true feelings, I no longer felt any reservations. I kissed his cheek lightly and whispered good night. Sometime in the middle of the night, a dream startled me awake. I dreamt of Silas. In the dream, those rough, warm hands were gently kneading my ankle, the swollen ache spreading upwards, climbing through my body. It felt like an eternity since I had been touched with such unexpected kindness. At 3 a.m, I picked up my phone and sent Silas a text. Need a driver tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Are you available? He replied almost instantly. That night, I also dreamt of Serafina. The first time I saw Serafina, I knew instantly she wasn't like me. She was stunning, proud, intelligent, and effortlessly elegant, almost regal. I understood that, deep down, she likely looked down on people like me. But in my dream, she was completely different. She slowly raised her pale, exquisite foot, placing it lightly on my knee. Her eyes, usually calm and distant, held a fervent intensity as she watched me, ripples of emotion disturbing her serene expression as I massaged her ankle. And then a sudden potent desire for destruction welled up inside me. I wanted to dismantle her composure, to forcefully claim her beauty. I couldn't tell if this urge stemmed from some inherent darkness within me, or simply because she was Dominic's wife. Yes, I knew my wife was cheating. And I knew the man who had been cuckolding me for nearly 6 months was a married executive at a listed company. Serafina believed she was carefully orchestrating our contact, but the truth was quite the opposite. I had cast the first lure. Still, I didn't mind being used as a pawn if it served my purpose. After all, in this particular entanglement, we were kindred spirits in our suffering. Perhaps we could even become allies. So, I decided to continue playing the part, cooperating with her moves until I had what I wanted. I'm a simple man, really. I have no grand ambitions or aspirations. I don't care if others view me as insignificant or ineffectual. All I want is to protect the few things I hold dear, to prevent anyone from encroaching upon them, not even an inch. A noise from the living room broke through my thoughts. I got up to investigate. It was my wife, Alara. She had stirred in her sleep and knocked the blanket off the sofa. I picked it up and covered her, then, fearing she might be cold, moved the electric heater closer to the sofa, positioning it so it wouldn't overheat her. Lately, she'd been deliberately avoiding me. She came home late every night and immediately fell asleep on the sofa, claiming it was the only place she could rest. To make her comfortable, I had spent 3 months of my meager earnings on an imported sofa, the most expensive piece of furniture in our humble home. I knelt down, looking at my wife's young, fresh face. My mind drifted back to Serafina. Compared objectively, Serafina was certainly not as youthful or vibrant as my wife. Alara possessed a kind of naive curiosity and vitality that men often found fatally attractive. Yet, for some reason, I found Serafina's aloofness and defiance far more captivating. She wasn't the type of woman to be easily humiliated or discarded by a man. I found myself intensely curious about what she would do next. Available. I quickly replied to her message. I next saw Serafina at a 5-star hotel. She didn't say much, simply sent me a room number and instructed me to come and pick her up. Although I had never personally entered that hotel, it was a place I was intimately familiar with. It was the very hotel where my wife and Dominic frequently met, and the room number she provided was one of their preferred clandestine rendezvous spots. For a moment I thought Serafina was setting a trap, luring me there for a dramatic scene of confrontation. That would have been utterly anticlimactic. Would a theatrical, messy showdown truly satisfy her? If that was all she desired, I would be deeply disappointed. Fortunately, I hadn't misjudged her. Serafina was far more complex than that. When I entered the room, I found Serafina sitting on the plush carpet, dressed in a long flowing red gown. She held a wine glass in her hand, clearly inebriated to the point of semi-consciousness. I approached and tried to help her up, but she was completely limp. Her head rested on my shoulder, her warm breath against my neck sending a confusing tremor through me. I looped my arm around her waist and lifted her. She leaned into my embrace, then slowly, weakly slid back down to the carpet. The sudden absence of her weight left me feeling strangely empty, even disappointed. I can't walk right now. Let me just rest for a bit, she murmured. She looked up at me with a languid, almost alluring gaze. Or maybe you could sit with me for a while. We could just talk. It was an invitation impossible to refuse. We talked aimlessly for a while, conversation drifting from one topic to another. It only took a few sentences before I realized she was merely feigning being completely incapacitated by drink. She had certainly had a lot to drink, but she wasn't that gone. And then, predictably, she revealed her sharp, hidden fangs. Her hand loosened, and the wine glass rolled under the bed. She asked me to retrieve it. As I peered under the bed, I felt a smile tugging at my lips, but I quickly suppressed it as I reached for the keys. The keys were instantly recognizable. They belonged to my wife, Alara. Attached to them wasn't just our house key, but also a small handmade teddy bear charm I had given her. I understood Serafina's intention perfectly. I played along, adopting the role of a husband whose wife's personal belongings had been found under a hotel bed. Using the keys as leverage, I claimed a valuable item had been lost and managed to access Alara's hotel check-in records. The records showed Dominic hadn't used his real name. Acting out the part required feigned panic, fury, jealousy, hysterical demands for confirmation, and a torrent of verbal abuse. Finally, sitting in her luxurious car, I broke down, weeping as I poured out every shameful detail about Alara's behavior, just as she intended. To be honest, Miss Serafina, I said, my voice thick with manufactured emotion, my wife is quite a bit younger than me. Her family was poor, and I paid for her university education. After she graduated, she wanted to become a CPA. She studied for 2 years and I supported her through that too. We didn't get married until she started working. I know I'm not good enough for her. I know she doesn't love me. She only married me to repay me. It's embarrassing to admit, but she doesn't even want to sleep in the same bed as me. But I love her. I'm willing to put up with anything for her. She's liked other men before, more than once, and I forgave her every time. She promised me she wouldn't do it again. Why would she do this to me? Even when she was embezzling money at work, doing illegal things, I didn't abandon her. I even tried to talk sense into her. Serafina abruptly cut me off at this point, her keen mind instantly latching onto the most valuable piece of information in my deliberately rambling confession. Embezzling funds? That's not a minor matter. I know, I said, affecting indignation. She was tricked by their boss. He's the real mastermind. Her boss? Do you know him? No, I don't. I heard his last name is Dominic. Serafina leaned forward, taking my hand, her expression earnest and serious. Listen to me. Your wife's situation isn't just about infidelity. If she's involved in financial crimes, she could face serious legal trouble potentially, with debt issues that could affect you too. I used to be a lawyer. If you trust me, don't make a scene about this yet. First, you need to quietly gather concrete evidence of your wife and her boss's embezzlement. Do you understand? I looked back at Serafina, my expression cool and level. She was incredibly close now. I could almost see the fine hairs on her face, the delicate lines around her eyes, and smell the faint, elegant fragrance emanating from her neck. As if under a spell, I nodded. 3 days later, I presented Serafina with the evidence detailing Alara's involvement in Dominic's embezzlement scheme. Citing the need for caution, she made backups of all the evidence. Soon, she would be able to use this information to utterly destroy her vulgar, foolish husband. Watching her so diligently working to manipulate me, I suddenly found her a little adorable. I had to admit I was wrong in my initial judgment. Fundamentally, we were the same kind of people. The seemingly distant and noble Serafina was, like me, meticulously calculating and fiercely vengeful. Neither of us were gentle souls. We were both the kind of predatory flowers that bloom on seemingly fertile ground. She hadn't changed from the person I first glimpsed. She was everything I had imagined. I felt happy, even a sense of contentment. To say I wasn't sad would be a lie. Dominic and I had our moments of fierce, intense connection, though perhaps romantic isn't quite the right word. 14 years ago, when I was in college and navigating the darkest period of my life, I met Dominic on a literary community website. He was a celebrated writer in the community, and I was his devoted fan. Like many socially awkward artistic youths, Dominic and I became internet friends who could talk for hours about anything and everything. Sometimes, simple topic would keep us engrossed all night, tireless and endlessly fascinated. Even though we had never met, we shared an almost uncanny mochi, a deep understanding and alignment of our perspectives, even if those perspectives were often twisted and dark. We would fiercely defend each other, champions raising banners for our shared, unconventional views. I confided in him, revealing a deeply buried secret, that I was an abandoned infant, shuffled between different foster families for years. It wasn't until middle school that I learned the truth about my birth parents. They were wanted murderers. Every time a new foster family discovered my lineage, I would be abandoned again, left to find the next household willing to take me in, only to await the inevitable abandonment. This was how I grew up. After I shared my story, he didn't contact me for a week. A week later, he published a short story online under his pen name. It was titled The Young Man and the Princess. The story told of a princess, long neglected by the emperor, sent to a barbaric land for a political marriage. Everyone at court shunned her, except for one young companion who volunteered to accompany her. In the foreign land, the young man witnessed the princess's humiliating and brutal existence. One night he quietly left. For the next 8 years he moved between neighboring kingdoms, using intricate diplomacy and strategic manipulation to bring about the downfall of the princess's motherland. In the final battle, the young man, now a formidable general, personally came to retrieve the princess. He stood with the now hardened princess before the imperial palace gates, watching as the emperor and empress, who had discarded her like cattle, made their final desperate struggle. He knew this was the scene the princess had longed for day and night. The young man offered her his sword. The princess accepted the weapon, forged for her by the young man over the course of his entire youth, and walked step by step towards her uncaring parents. The young man watched her retreating back, smiling for the first time in years. After reading that story, I fell deeply in love with Dominic. I desperately wanted to meet him, to possess him, to share laughter with him, to weep in his arms. But at the time I didn't even know his name. Despite my repeated pleas, Dominic was reluctant to meet. He finally agreed just before my graduation. While he wasn't exactly who I'd pictured, he was a clean-cut, seemingly upright young man, and I was instantly captivated. We shared a period of what felt like an idyllic, almost divine existence. Embracing, kissing, giving ourselves completely to each other, entwined in every way. At his urging, I deleted my account on the literary website, left my hometown for the city he wanted to live in, and gave up my own aspirations to become a full-time housewife. He became my entire world. But within 2 or 3 years he changed. He stopped reading and writing. He no longer stayed up late with me, delving into our deepest, most secret thoughts. He grew increasingly vulgar, irritable, and overweight. He spent his days and nights socializing, and our conversations became increasingly scarce. He was like a completely different person. At first, I rationalized this change, telling myself it was perhaps normal. In this complex, materialistic world, who could truly remain as naive and pure as they were in their youth? I should try to understand him, not blame him. But then he cheated again. Once, twice. With one person, then two. And each sordid affair left a trail of clues for me to discover. He wasn't just crude. He was becoming increasingly foolish. I had always wanted a child, a new life onto whom I could pour all the love I had been denied. Despite years of trying, I couldn't conceive. Heaven knows how much suffering I endured trying to get pregnant, all while he harbored contempt for my bloodline, my very genes, simply because I was the daughter of murderers. The person I had trusted completely, to whom I had given everything, had turned around and plunged a knife into my most vulnerable spot. It hurt deeply. Silas's evidence proved invaluable. It required almost no effort. I simply sent the anonymous packet of documents to the company president's office. Within days, Dominic and Alara were both under investigation. The amount of embezzled funds was significant but not astronomical, allowing some flexibility in handling the case. Their jobs, however, were unsalvageable. Dominic had to sell his car and our apartment to scrape together enough money to cover the restitution. Aside from the assets I owned before our marriage, Dominic was left with nothing. Perhaps some might wonder why I didn't immediately file for divorce. I had my reasons. One last question I needed to answer. 2 years prior, Dominic and I had purchased a joint life insurance policy with a substantial payout. If one spouse died accidentally, the other would receive enough to live comfortably for the rest of their life. We'd initially bought it to help a friend of Dominic's meet a sales quota, and I had almost forgotten about it. It was Dominic who reminded me. More accurately, it was Dominic and Alara's text messages that reminded me. After being investigated and losing everything, Dominic began discussing with Alara a plan to kill me for the insurance money. After years of marriage, I wasn't deemed worthy of being his wife or the mother of his child, but I was his sole remaining opportunity for a fresh start. They had even meticulously planned the execution. Dominic and I shared a single remaining hobby: skiing every winter. We were both skilled skiers and enjoyed racing on steep slopes. Their plan was to set a trap on my designated route, causing me to fall off a cliff. It sounded perfectly sickeningly neat. I played along without a hint of suspicion, following Dominic's every instruction. In a strange way, I even felt a sense of anticipation, wondering how the final act would unfold. The most intense attachment of my life was about to reach its climax. The sun was bright that day. Dominic and I stood side by side at the top of the slope, clad in ski gear that obscured everything but our eyes, looking like any ordinary, affectionate, middle-class couple. Before we started, I looked at him, hesitating for a fraction of a second. I knew that beneath my skis lay a gate to hell, while beneath his stretched a path to a potentially brighter future. "Dominic," I asked, "do you remember that sword?" "What sword?" He seemed taken aback, even flustered by my sudden, out-of-the-blue question. "The sword the young man gave to the princess in the story." He squinted, trying to recall, but couldn't. The blank look on his face made me want to laugh for some inexplicable reason. "Let's go." I pushed off first. Dominic quickly followed, gliding alongside me. We skied in tandem, approaching the fork where our paths were meant to diverge. Suddenly I changed course, turning onto his intended route. Dominic shouted something from behind, his voice laced with urgency and frustration. He hadn't anticipated my change of direction. Of course he wouldn't switch to my route. He knew it was the path of death. We skied side by side again, neither willing to yield, hurtling towards the inevitable. Then a thin wire, almost invisible in the sunlight, glinted just ahead. By the time we saw it, it was too late. My husband and I clung to each other, tumbling and crashing down the mountainside. Till death do us part. Even in death we would be together. But the dying process was agonizingly slow. After what felt like an eternity, I was jolted awake by the searing pain throughout my body. I opened my eyes. I couldn't move, my limbs screaming in protest. Then, in the distance, I saw a thin figure approaching. Shrouded in a faint halo of light, he drew closer. I blinked, thinking it was a hallucination. For a moment I saw the young man from the story, gripping a heavy, magnificent iron sword, his armor stained with blood, walking towards me. Then I saw his face clearly. It wasn't Dominic. It was Silas, the husband of my husband's mistress. What I'm about to tell you is a somewhat ignoble story. A little over a year ago, late one night, I received a driver-for-hire request near a bar in the city center. The passengers were two obviously drunk men. One of them was Dominic. Perhaps he was too intoxicated, perhaps I had changed significantly over the years, or perhaps he was too busy boasting about his lewd exploits to his friend, but he didn't recognize me. I, however, recognized him instantly. Dominic was a senior from my university. We had worked on a project together under the same advisor for a while, though we weren't particularly close. He was exactly as I remembered him, arrogant and coarse, using utterly distasteful language to describe how he kept his wife in the dark while pursuing one young woman after another. If his friend hadn't asked a question about his wife, I wouldn't have paid him any mind at all. My wife. She's an ice queen, understand? The kind who doesn't make a sound in bed. Then how did you two meet? Honestly, I regret it now. If I'd known she was such a cold fish, I wouldn't have bothered. See, she was online dating one of my junior classmates back then. He was too awkward to meet her, so I went in his place. You wouldn't believe how beautiful my wife was back then. It was love at first sight for me. I told her I was the guy she'd been talking to, and she fell for it. Learned my lesson. They both burst into laughter in the back seat, each sound like a rusted drill bit twisting into my ears. It felt like raw flesh, not pain exactly, just a dull numbness. I noted Dominic's address and watched his building. 2 days later I saw Serafina. That was the first time I truly saw her. For years I had never stopped looking for her. But she had vanished as if into thin air, deleting her online account, leaving her hometown. And at that time I didn't even know her name or what she looked like. It was my own inherent timidity and self-doubt that had allowed fate to push her into the arms of a scoundrel. It was my fault. I had failed her. That day, Serafina came downstairs wearing a long robe to take out the trash. Then she stood in the middle of the residential pathway, lit a cigarette, and stared out at the layers of distant urban haze. She was still the woman of my imagination. Coolly beautiful, proud, noble, utterly beyond reproach or violation. My princess. I spent some time investigating their lives, focusing particularly on Dominic. Beyond his repeated infidelities, he was also dishonest in his professional dealings, frequently accepting bribes through his position, his appetite growing with each transaction. Dominic was clearly not a decent man. But if he had shown even a little kindness to Serafina, things might not have ended up like this for him. Not only did he despise Serafina's background, refusing to have a child with her, but he had also shrewdly purchased that massive insurance policy on her life, already planning her ultimate demise. He had taken Serafina, using my identity, and given her not love but profound pain. I couldn't stand by. I had to do something. Alara was indeed a university student I had been financially supporting, and she genuinely wanted to repay my kindness. I never harbored any inappropriate thoughts towards her. However, while I was formulating my plan, she accidentally discovered what I was doing. Alara was a girl who lived life on her own terms, unrestrained and perhaps a little wild. She didn't trust the institution of marriage but was drawn to fleeting, intense relationships. After hearing my story, she offered to help me exact revenge on Dominic. Her willingness to participate was what allowed this intricate plan to take shape. To make the performance convincing, we got a marriage certificate and pretended to live together under one roof. Simultaneously, she kept applying for jobs at Dominic's company. Before long, Alara was hired. She barely had to try. Dominic, like a cat-scenting fish, was immediately drawn to her, entangled by her charm. All it took was a simple hint from her, and the greedy Dominic quickly encouraged Alara to help him embezzle funds. Obtaining the evidence that could destroy Dominic was far easier than I had anticipated. I could have completed everything on my own. Serafina's involvement wasn't strictly necessary, but I didn't want that. I wanted to hand her the opportunity to punish Dominic herself. I understood Serafina. Rather than being protected from the shadows, she would prefer to wield the sword herself. She was the princess filled with burning hatred, I was the young man who paved the path for her revenge and then offered her the iron sword. My sword was ready. That's why I had to marry Alara. It was the only way to attract Seraphina's attention, to draw her in, to meet her, to be used by her. Felt like destiny. Poured my efforts and half my life's love into this plan for her. And she got her revenge, destroying Dominic. She was meant to regain her freedom and start anew. But I never expected her to choose not freedom, but mutual destruction with him. Originally, upon learning of Dominic's murder plot, she had secretly shifted the position of the wire that was meant to kill her. The person who should have died in that accident was Dominic. Yet, at the last moment, she had switched her course and skied onto the path that was now meant to be fatal for him. Why? Why did she change her mind at the last second? Why did she choose to die with Dominic? Could it be that Seraphina still loved Dominic? Could my princess have fallen for that despicable man after all? I didn't understand. I couldn't comprehend it. I couldn't accept it. Jealousy surged through me. Fury. Even hatred. The ending I wrote for The Young Man and the Princess 14 years ago was not merely the battle before the palace gates. There was a much longer story that followed. After the princess had personally slain her parents, she returned the sword to the young man and asked him to send her back to the barbaric land. Why? The people there showed you such disrespect. Why return? The young man asked, bewildered. Kaelin, the princess said softly, calling him by name for the first time. Have you ever felt like you had a home? Home. The young man looked at her, confused. I didn't, not before. This cold, vast palace was never my home. It was my cage. But in that barren desert I had a husband, I had children. They were rough and wild, but they were my family. Princess. Kaelin, please send me home. I beg you. Of course, the young man did not send the princess back. Instead, he took her back to the palace where she grew up, placing her under constant guard. 3 months later, with the support of neighboring kingdoms, the young man declared himself king, becoming the new emperor. The first step he took was to marry the princess of the fallen dynasty, giving himself a legitimate reason to claim the throne. The princess never returned to the desert. She was imprisoned in the deep confines of the palace, becoming an unhappy empress. And the young man, now the new emperor who had revealed his ambition, used the princess's family in the distant desert as leverage, threatening her to stay alive, threatening her to fulfill the duties of an empress, to love him, to support him, to bear him children. The story ended with a conversation between two young girls outside the palace gates. Do you know the most beautiful love story in the world? I know. It's the story of the emperor and the empress. No, it's not. It's the story of the young man and the princess. The story of an ordinary young man who conquered an empire to save the princess he loved and marry her. Isn't that moving? Hee hee. I hope someone will love me like that when I grow up. I survived. Only I survived. The injuries to my waist and legs hadn't fully healed. Leaning on a crutch, I went out under the cover of darkness to buy food from the small supermarket near the complex. But just as I emerged from the damp, dilapidated basement we were hiding in, Silas grabbed my arm from behind. Where are you going? To get some food. Let me go. You should go back. You're too easily spotted like this. His eyes were particularly bright in the darkness, and they held a chilling intensity that made it impossible to argue. I hobbled back to the basement step by painful step. Although small and damp, it was surprisingly well equipped with basic necessities. Silas had been remarkably thorough in his preparations. On our desperate escape route, this was considered a comfortable enough refuge. Yes, Silas and I were on the run. Our reason for being fugitives was Dominic's death. Simply put, Silas and I were wanted for his murder. The evidence against us was solid. The police were already hunting us. Even now, almost 3 months later, I couldn't forget the moment Dominic died in front of me. Perhaps because we had tumbled down the mountain together, we were both injured and unable to move, but we were alive when we came to rest. As we lay there, we saw a figure approaching from a distance. It was Silas. Silas gently helped me sit up and checked my injuries. Then, in front of both Dominic and me, he calmly explained the full story. He recounted how Dominic had used his stolen identity to pursue me, and how he had meticulously planned everything to get his revenge. His tone was unnervingly detached, as if discussing a trivial matter. In my stunned state, I looked at Dominic, my husband, the man who had ruined my life. He was sprawled on the snow, a pathetic, melting mess. Dominic had always been skilled at reading situations. He knew he was at a disadvantage, needing Silas's help to even leave this wilderness. This was not the time for arrogance. Tears welled in his eyes as he apologized, pleading for our forgiveness and promising compensation. But Silas didn't spare him a glance, showing no intention of helping him. So Dominic turned to me, grabbing the hem of my ski suit, begging me like a child who had misbehaved. In our 10 years of marriage, he had never looked at me with such desperate urgency. "Serafina, please don't leave me here. It's desolate, I'm injured. I won't survive the night." I looked at Dominic, and a wave of indecision washed over me. At that moment Silas stepped closer to me. "Do you want to save him?" He gazed at me, his eyes searching mine. Almost instinctively I nodded. "You love him? Even knowing the despicable things he did? Even knowing your marriage was a lie? Even knowing he not only cheated on you, but planned to murder you?" Silas's voice turned dark, a low growl. "I knew it. From the moment you were willing to die with him, I knew. I didn't want him to die like that." Silas was silent for a moment, regaining his composure. Then he spoke again. "Serafina, do you remember the ending of that story?" A shiver ran down my spine. A terrible premonition settled in my gut. He continued. "The young man returned for the princess. He helped her get her revenge, but the princess abandoned him." Silas. Most people didn't truly understand that story. The young man didn't want an empire. He didn't have grand ambitions like that. All he ever wanted was for the princess to be by his side, no matter what it took. Then, Silas took off his hat and pressed it firmly over Dominic's mouth and nose. After a few minutes, Dominic stopped struggling. It was a long time before I fully registered what had happened. I collapsed beside Dominic's body, vomiting onto the snow. With this act, Dominic's death was no longer an accident. It was murder. The police would only need to investigate slightly to connect me to Alara, and through Alara, linking her to Dominic wouldn't be difficult. My trap on the ski slope and Silas's act of suffocation would both be exposed. We had only one option left: run. And so Silas and I became inextricably bound together, living as fugitives, hiding in a small town on the edge of the city, using the pretense of being husband and wife. There was no separating us now. The young man in the story imprisoned the princess in his palace. The real-life Serafina became a crippled fugitive, utterly dependent on Silas. Silas returned quickly, carrying spaghetti and butter he'd somehow managed to buy. He made me a simple Western meal in the basement. My appetite was poor, and I only ate a little before going to sleep early. The basement was cold without heating. I woke up freezing in the middle of the night. As if he sensed it, Silas moved closer, wrapping his arms around me. His rough hands gently stroked my body. He always seemed to seek intimacy at these times, ostensibly to share warmth rather than for pleasure. Near dawn, I held him close, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Sleep had abandoned me completely. During our time on the run together, I finally came to understand Silas. He had grown up in an environment of constant negation, fostering a personality marked by insecurity and avoidance. He expressed his true self only through the anonymity of the internet and his writing. And I had been the first person to affirm him, to admire him, to trust him. If only years ago, he had been able to overcome his own self-doubt and come to meet me, perhaps we might have found solace and healing in each other, becoming the perfect partners. But fate, it seemed, was cruel. Everything had changed now. His love for me had curdled into control. My admiration for him had transformed into fear. He couldn't understand my complex, tangled feelings for Dominic, and I found it incredibly difficult to accept his self-sacrificing, almost performative devotion. We were a miserable, resentful pair bound together. Two criminals utterly dependent on each other. Dawn broke. He was asleep in my arms. When the police arrived, he woke suddenly at the sound, but it was too late. We were both pinned to the mattress, handcuffs clicking shut around our wrists. Through it all, Silas looked at me calmly. He knew I had secretly called the police. "Serafina." "Silas." "Serafina." He said my name again, a hint of disbelief or reluctance in his voice. "Silas, it's over." He gave me a fleeting, desolate smile. That was the last time I ever saw him. The day after arriving at the police station, I underwent a medical examination. Afterwards, I was asked to stay behind. A young female officer looked me up and down. You know, right? Know what? You're pregnant. I froze, stunned into disbelief. You're already 2 months along. You didn't even realize. She continued. The father is probably Silas, isn't it? As soon as she finished speaking, I started to laugh uncontrollably. I clutched my belly, laughing so hard I sank to the floor, unable to stop. Serafina, calm down. What's so funny? Wasn't it obvious? Wasn't it hilarious? My child, the child I had always longed for. The child I had wanted to give all the love I had been denied. Their father, too, was a murderer.